Forced to make a choice as to whether we are going to follow God and take Trust Trail, or follow our flesh, the world, or Satan and take Pride Pathway. And we learned the two roads end up in very different places. Trust Trail takes us to freedom and to peace and satisfaction. Pride Pathway does not. It leads to disappointment, suffering, and bondage, sometimes even death. So for this reason, paying attention whenever we are at the crossroads is very important. This week we're going to start where we left off last week. We're going to talk a little bit more about Pride Pathway. Not that we can't experience challenging things even when we are following God, are on Trust Trail. But for the most part, the trouble in our life comes from pride. Sometimes our own pride, but not always, as we learn. We can get a lot of painful wounds because somebody else makes prideful choices. But pride is the culprit. I'm really glad that you guys are taking Healing Journey now, at this point in your life, while you're teens, because you have an opportunity to learn a better way before you make 1,000 mistakes like adults have who've gone before you. For the past 20 years, I've worked with adults who were trying to climb out of very deep garbage piles, wound after wound after wound, mostly because of a series of choices that they made to take Pride Pathway. You have an opportunity to learn from their mistakes and go a better way. Even today, your decisions are so important. As I shared last week, I was only 15 years old when a single decision I made derailed my life and brought very painful consequences to me for a long time. I began a relationship with a guy and I should not have. And it's not that God doesn't approve of relationships. Relationships are God's idea. That's his plan. But he does have strong warnings about romantic relationships or sexual relationships outside of marriage. I mean, dating doesn't work very well unless there's very strong boundaries and accountability, because you're basically camping out at temptation crossroads every time that you are together. It's like trying to put your hand in a fire but not get burned. Anyway, I did enter that relationship at 15. I was married at 19. And since then, I've made a lot of prideful choices, things I regret in my life, but there was no decision I've made that brought more pain to my life than that one I made at 15. And I say this simply to illustrate the importance of your life right now and the things that you choose. So let's continue our study on Pride Pathway by looking at a passage in Jeremiah. You can get your Bibles open. If you open the middle of your Bible, you'll be somewhere around Psalms or Isaiah. Just keep going a little bit further and you'll be in Jeremiah. And turn to chapter 2. So Jeremiah was one of the Old Testament prophets. And that meant he heard from God, and when he did, he shared what he heard with the people. So Jeremiah says this in chapter 2, verse 13. My people have committed two sins. They have forsaken me, the spring of living water, and have dug their own cisterns, broken cisterns, that cannot hold water. So let's unpack this verse, because it really has a ton to teach us. Jeremiah is saying here there are two sins. The first sin is that we forsake God, and there's your first blank, forsaking God. When we take that first step toward Pride Pathway, we are turning away from God. We are rejecting his best for us and going our own way. We're saying we don't believe that what God says is true, that we don't trust him. So forsaking God is rejecting him. That would be another way of saying it. And there's lots of ways we do this. Here are some examples. Not being kind to people, not being honest, not forgiving people who hurt us, not surrounding ourselves with people who are like-minded. For example, people who are involved in youth group with us or growing in a church. Not reading our Bible, not praying, not helping others when we have the opportunity. Not choosing Christian friends who are also seeking to follow God. And that gives you some examples. You heard the word not a lot, because these are the sins of omission. We're omitting the things from our life that are right and good. And this all comes from pride, believing we know better than God. Forsaking God is the first sin, and the second is building broken cisterns. There's your next blank, building broken cisterns. So after we've made the decision to turn from God's best for us, then we make a new plan. We start running the show ourselves. We begin relying on what we think and what we know. God calls this building broken cisterns. Come on in. Back in Jeremiah's day, and still in many places of the world, cisterns were built so that they would have a source of water during times of drought. So they would dig a large pit out of the dirt or the rock or whatever, and then they would line it with plaster. So when it rained, it would fill up and catch the water. And that sounds like a good idea, but there were problems with it. Oftentimes the plaster would crack, and then they would go and find the cistern empty, and there would be no water. Have you ever seen what happens to water when it just sits for a long time, for years? It collects bugs and dirt and leaves, and it turns a lovely green color while it grows algae. Yum! I don't know about you, but that would not be my choice for a drink of water. Sounds like a good idea, but it really didn't turn out to be a great idea. Cisterns were man's effort to self-provide for the water they needed. But it wasn't as good as what God provided. That's the point he's making in our Jeremiah passage. Our ways are never as good as God's ways. As he said, God is like the spring of living water. I mean, spring water is the best tasting water. It's pure and clean and life-giving. Our prideful efforts will never turn out as well as they would if we would trust God to lead us. Our efforts are like filthy water, and God's plan is like pure water. So broken cisterns are the things that we do that are wrong or are against God's way. And we call these sins of commission, acts that we commit that are wrong. The Israelites are the people that Jeremiah is speaking to here in our passage. And they had a terrible track record of following God. Whenever they came to temptation crossroads, they always headed down pride pathway. They consistently made the wrong choices, believing they were wiser than God. And a lot of the Old Testament tells this story about the Israelites coming to the crossroads, choosing pride pathway, falling away from God, finding themselves in deep trouble, coming back to God, crying out for help, and then repenting of their sin, being sorry for what they had done. And then they would return to God for a little while, until the next time they came to the crossroads, and they did it all over again. And they just kept doing this year after year after year for hundreds of years. At first glance, it might seem like the Israelites' temptations were different from ours today. Their weak spot were the false idols of the people who lived around them, the foreign gods of the other people living in the land. These other groups had utterly detestable practices, including child sacrifice and demon worship and witchcraft. It was wicked and it was evil, and God told them to stay away from those practices, but they would never listen to God. False idols are the problem. Worshiping the wrong thing. A false idol is anything we worship or look to for power to save us, to provide for our life, or to protect us that does not have the power to do so. There's your blanks. Power, provide, and protect. Let me say that again. This is a key statement for you guys to hang on to. A false idol is anything at all that we look to for power to save us, to provide for our life, or to protect us that does not have the power to do so. Everyone has false idols, something that they give a higher place in their life than God. And this is what leads to sin, and everyone sins. So let's take a little detour now and talk about false idols for a minute. We're going to come back to Jeremiah, so you might want to mark your place there. But I'd like you to turn over to Ecclesiastes now. Ecclesiastes. Part of the scripture's in your journey handbook, but the whole thing isn't. So you're going to need to find it. Ecclesiastes 2. So there was a king in the Old Testament named Solomon. Solomon was the son of King David. And Solomon had way too much time and money on his hands. And as a result, he turned to an extensive list of false idols. So listen as I read Solomon's report. I'm in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, starting in verse 1. I said to myself, "Come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good." But that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter, I said, is madness, and what does pleasure accomplish? I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly, my mind still guiding me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was good for people to do under the heavens during the few days of their lives. I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired male and female singers and a harem as well, the delights of a man's heart. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all this, my wisdom stayed with me. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. So in Solomon's day, he had it all, and he did it all, and he tried it all. It says pleasure. He was embracing folly. Alcohol, it says he cheered himself with wine. Achieving good works, quite a list there. Built buildings, parks, gardens, and reservoirs. He tried materialism. Whatever there was to buy, Solomon bought it, if not by the dozens, if not thousands. He had like 1,400 chariots or some crazy thing. Money, he was the richest man ever to live. Sexual relationships, for heaven's sakes. He had his own harem. Seeking status, he became greater by far than anyone. Shopping, he denied himself nothing. Working hard, he took delight in his labor. So what did he learn after he did all that? What was Solomon's perspective? What was his take on that? Let's read verse 11. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless. A chasing after the wind, nothing was gained under the sun. He said it was meaningless. He said he gained absolutely nothing. Nothing good came from that. Now, for the most part, Solomon's list does include things that our world tells us are good to pursue. I mean, things like money, work, pleasure, approval. Today, we often look for that on social media through likes and views. But when Solomon went down those roads, they did not satisfy him. His report is a gift to us. We have an opportunity to learn from this man. They did not make him happy. He said it was pointless. Will we learn from the wisest man ever to live? Will we listen to Solomon's report? So talking again about our false idols, we can make an idol out of anything, positive or negative. Some good things that we can turn into idols might include our family, our church, friends, all good. But God says they're not to have a place higher than Him in our life. We can make them into idols if we do. We put more trust in them than we do God. Food is good. Exercise is good, but not if we eat too much or eat the wrong thing or exercise too much. We can make beauty and good looks an idol, investing our whole life in that. Many people do. And social media is bad in its own right, but we can use it to gauge our self-worth, which is not what God would intend. Guys, this is where our life goes south. When we try to put something in the place where only God belongs. That's where things go in the wrong direction. If God doesn't have the top spot, then we have a false idol. We're building broken cisterns. We're choosing the nasty water and turning down the spring water. And then there's another list we need to talk about, and these are negative things we turn to for power, protection, provision. The directions we turn to make ourselves feel better, take away our pain, feel like we're important to someone. There are a lot of destructive things out there that we turn to in order to get our needs met. Our motivation might be good, but our needs were created by God. Our needs do need to be met. Your needs are important. We all need to be known. We all need to belong and be accepted, to be nurtured and respected, to feel secure, to be safe, to feel appreciated. Every human being needs these things. These are God-created needs. The needs are good. But if we try to get them met while traveling on Pride Pathway, we're going to get hurt every time. This is the road to heartbreak. We might avoid trouble for a time, but eventually it will take us captive and destroy us if we don't get off that road. The other list of false idols can include any addictive substance like food, drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, sex, pornography, stealing, lying, dealing, criminal activity, harming your body like cutting, games, bad friends, and many more negative things can become false idols in our life too. Let's pause here. I want you to consider these things for a minute. You have a place on your outline there. I want you to consider false idols that may have been in your life. I've mentioned several. Maybe one or two of them caught your attention. So you have a place on your outline now to write that down. So if you can think of something, either positive or negative, or maybe both, that you've trusted for power or protection or provision, why don't you make a couple of notes? I'll give you a couple minutes to do that.